So how's it going, guys? This is Ryo Murata, photographer based in Tokyo. So in today's video I wanted to talk about a light I recently purchased, which is the Propet Mono 300N. And how should I explain this to you guys? The brand Propet is actually a Japanese strobe slash flash company based in Tochigi Prefecture. Tochigi is basically 2 states above Tokyo actually, and they have actually been the pioneers behind making the monolight type of strobes flash units in Japan ever since they were founded back in 1977, and they're really focused on making super compact, super not lightweight but durable lighting, sort of like flash units, and have been serving the Japanese community for a really long time. And I guess in North America, you guys have something called Alienbees and Einsteins, and a lot of people mention that why is why are Alienbees still like in production still, why does that company still exist? And I guess that due to the fact that I hear from a lot of people from North America, the Alienbees, Einsteins type of flash units, I hear that they have great customer service. If it breaks down, they can basically fix it for you. Similar to Propet, they actually have sort of like a maintenance center in Tokyo, and if anything happens, that you can basically bring it, drop it off, and they go fix it for you. And I guess that customer relationship has prospered for the long longevity of the company, and they still make flash units as of 2023. Basically, flash photography, there are 2 types. On-camera speedlight type of flash, which I mentioned previously on my channel, where I attached a speedlight onto my camera, like hot shoe. The other one is sort of like these types of studio lights. The pros and cons of that, to say directly to you guys, is that the speedlights is much more flexible, and you can basically, because it's attached to the camera, you can basically move wherever you want. And because it's like you use AA batteries, it's portable, you can shoot it on location, you can shoot it outside or indoors. You basically can achieve a certain look using those types of lights. However, monolights, you have to keep in mind that monolights are not easy to travel with, unfortunately, because typically they're really large, they're bulky, and because their majority of them are run using an AC cable, which had to draw power from the plug, you're sort of like stuck indoors most of the time. But the beauty of having a monolight is that you can basically have these lights away from the sort of like on top. Instead of having it on top of your camera, you can basically move this away from the camera. And this is like really important that not many people mention, is that the farther away the light source is from your camera, you get better image quality. Unfortunately, I have to say, because if you ever shot with a what you call speedlight on top of your camera, what you get is, because the camera's right here and the speedlight's on top of here, when you shoot the light at your subject or your model, where does that shadow go? And that shadow basically goes behind that model. And typically when that happens, you can't get a separation between the subject, the model, or some kind of product with the background, because it kind of blends into that area, because light's basically shooting directly at your subject. However, when you have a studio light on a light stand far away from the camera, what happens is that light is basically hitting that subject and then casting a shadow, maybe 45-degree angles behind them. Thus, you get sort of like a sense of depth in that area, which makes that image more flattering to the eyes, more natural actually, than having a little speedlight on top of your camera. And this topic can go on and on, so I'm going to cut it right here. So that's sort of like the benefits of having a studio light. You can basically move them everywhere as long as that AC cable is connected to the wall output. And also I have to mention that Japanese flash units typically have this distinctive handle sticking out, where you basically unscrew and you can basically tilt it up and down. While I think North American lights typically have a ratchet handle where you ratchet to the right, the worst thing about those is that it kind of hits the side of the unit, and you basically have to like yank it out, and you have to twist it, yank it out and twist it. While this one's basically, there's a clearance, so you don't have to, there's no interference when you're like shifting this up and down, which is really easy to use actually. And also for knowledge for you guys, that the two high-end strobe units, flash unit brands is actually Profoto from Swedish, or I said Swedish, Sweden, and also Broncolor by Switzerland. And typically, I think back in the days, if you were like a fashion photographer, you used Profoto. If you're a product photographer, you use Broncolor. Back in like advertising agency when I worked as an assistant, I used Broncolor because I was a product photographer type of guy. And I have to admit, they're like really great light units, really expensive unless you do high-end jobs. I mean, the majority of you guys, including me, I can't afford it because it's like too expensive. But unlike those foreign counterparts, in Japan we have 3 manufacturers. We have Comet, which a lot of what you call shashinkan, how should I say, photo or portrait studios in Japan use Comet, and lots of location photographers actually use Propet. And there's also Sunstar Strobe, which I never used it in my opinion, but there's actually 3 brands in Japan. And a lot of people use those 3 brands due to the fact that the cost to maintain those Profoto and Broncolor is out of the charts. Like if something happens, if something breaks and stuff like that, that maintenance cost is actually trifold more than when we compare it with these types of Japanese made flash units such as Comet, Propet, and Sunstar Strobe, because due to the fact that they're made in Japan, there's always some kind of maintenance center in Tokyo, and if something happens you can bring it in there and you get a sort of like a detailed examination of how long it would take to get it fixed and stuff like that, and they will give you some kind of replacements and stuff like that. So a lot of people tend to use the Japanese types of flash units because they are really reliable and the maintenance centers do a really great job in maintaining them, while the foreign types of Broncolor and Profoto, it's hard to like grasp how long it would take to get it fixed and stuff like that. Okay, so the pros of using these types of like studio lights is that you get far more light output from these units than speed lights. And as a reference, speed lights typically emit at max at full power 1/1, 60 watts of power, while this one in particular, it's called Mono 300N, and typically the number is basically the amount of watts it can emit at max power. So this is like a 300 watt unit. So when you do the calculations, 300 watts versus 60 watts, so 60 watts, 120 watts, 1 stop, 240 stops is 2 stops, and then 480 watts is basically 3 stops. So roughly you're getting 2 to 3 times more light output from this unit, and depending on the flash unit, there's like 500 watts, there's 600 watts, there's even 1000 watts of flash actually available, but those are really expensive. But what I'm trying to say is that 2 to 3 stops that you can achieve from these studio lights is, if you convert that to like f stops, that becomes 2.8, f4, f5.6, or f8 or something like that. You can basically, if the value that you're shooting is like f2.8, you can stretch that to f5.6 to f8 actually using a studio flash, which basically you can get more flexibility in terms of what kind of image you can get. Okay, so now let's talk about the unit itself. So not much to talk about, but a lot of people who are new to studio photography, or studio flash actually, so when you look at the front side of the flash, studio flash, there's always a circular tube, glass tube. That's the flash tube itself, and that's actually where the light's actually emitting. And the sort of like in the center, there's another sort of like lamp. This is a halogen lamp. I forgot how much watt it is, but that's basically the modeling lamp. And what the modeling lamp, this is the great thing about studio flash, is that when you turn it on, that modeling lamp basically gives you an indication of where that light is hitting on your subject. And this is halogen, so it's like really hot. It's like tungsten actually, so it's like really hot. Let me turn it off before I burn myself. But it gives you a sort of like a clear indication where that light is hitting, especially at your model or at your subject. And what's great about this is, if you're like a product photographer and you want to sort of like control where that light is hitting, you can basically look at the modeling lamp and kind of gives you an idea. Okay, if I shoot at this angle, and when you fire the flash, when you take that final shot, you will get something similar to that modeling lamp that it's like trying to replicate, and you can basically cut down that like time and like moving the lights and stuff like that by a significant amount of time, instead of like using, you know, speed lights where you basically have to judge by looking at the image at the back of the screen and stuff like that. So this is actually something used among a lot of product photographers because you get an idea of where that light is hitting beforehand, and I can't live without it actually. So also keep in mind that never touch the flash tube and the halogen wick modeling lamp, because our fingers are really oily, and when we touch this like flash tube with our bare hands, that oil gets onto the flash tube, and worst case scenario, because it emits so much heat that the flash tube expands and might blow up in worst case scenario. So when you're actually trying to like remove the modeling lamp or something like that, please use a glove actually, so to prevent that from happening. And if you're ever changing the flash tube, use gloves because you don't want that to happen. You don't want that oil to get onto the flash tube. Thus, if you do that, you'll actually shorten the lifespan of the flash tube and the modeling lamp. So keep that in mind. Wear gloves if you're actually touching it. So yeah. And also I have to mention that these studio lights have some kind of like reflector which you can basically move out, and I mean by doing that you can attach various types of sort of like accessories. You can add like a different reflector, you can add grids, you can add soft boxes and stuff like that, but which I won't get into unfortunately. Okay, so looking at the unit itself, what's interesting about Propet's like flash unit is over the like decade or so, or maybe 2 decades actually, the interface throughout their lineup hasn't changed much at all, and it's like super analog, similar to Nikon F3. The design has that vibe to it, but it's like really simple. There's an on and off switch, and on the right side there's this sort of like a modeling lamp where you turn it on, turn it off. I turn it off right now because I don't want to like shorten the lifespan of that modeling lamp. And the middle button right here is actually the the flash, which you can basically fire actually. And once it charges, it basically emits to a green LED. Okay, you guys see it? When it's blinking, it's basically charging the condenser within this unit. And on the right side, that's basically the cell actually. So cell is, how should I explain? So when you have like multiple units of this, typically if you have one unit that flashes, the cell unit itself, so the cell unit is right here. So this basically gathers all the light information around the surroundings, and if one light actually fires, it simultaneously fires this unit with no delay. And this is like useful because then you don't have to attach a sync cable to this and have a wireless sync cable running through this, and when this fires, another unit automatically fires. You can do that instead of having every single flash unit having a wireless trigger. You don't need to do that. So that's actually when it's like really useful. So on the right side there's this sort of like sound beep, which when you fire, it basically sort of makes a beeping sound, and this is like useful if you're shooting models and stuff like that, so you know when that beeping sound sort of like ends, that's actually when it's fully charged, so you can basically press the shutter. And this unit is a sort of like an entry-level unit, so the higher the power you use, it's going to take like 1 second to charge, so 1.5 seconds for it to like sort of like charge. Then you understand that and you can basically press the shutter again. Which is really important is that majority of these entry level or mid level types of flash units, when you sort of like change the output, you have to sort of like dump the power, because you have to keep in mind that these units draw power from the AC, and there's these capacitors which restore up the energy, and when you press the shutter it releases. However, when you change the output, it can't compensate for that change, so you have to like throw away that power that it just initially stored before you keep on shooting at that designated sort of like setting. So typically when you change the output of the flash unit, you have to like fire it once so it could release that power that is stored beforehand. And that's called actually dumping power. While the more expensive light units such as Profoto and Broadcolor, you don't need to do that because it has some kind of like mechanical, like the mechanical engineers actually made it so they can sort of like keep on shooting and it automatically sort of like dumps power. So okay, so this is going to be my personal biased opinion unfortunately, but I would say studio lights specifically, if you have 300 watts of power, you can get mostly 80 to 90% of jobs done with 300 watts, due to the fact that when you think about it, if you're shooting with digital, you can basically boost up the ISO value, and typically 100 to 400 you won't see that much of a difference, and that's basically 2 stops, which theoretically, when you think about it, this 300 watts of power becomes 600 watts if you increase the ISO value by 1 stop, and if you boost it by 2 stops, if you shoot at ISO 400 on digital, this becomes a 1200 watt flash unit, and that's actually more than enough. And when you look at from the film side, majority of probably 90% or maybe 100% of people who shoot with a studio flash will 100% use either Kodak Gold 200 or maybe Portra 400, which is, like I said, similar to boosting your ISO value on a digital camera. That's like 1 stop or maybe 2 stops. So you can basically achieve more light output by doing that, and 300 watts is actually going to be more than enough for most cases. And you have to keep in mind that the more watts of power of that unit, so 600 watts, 500 watts, or maybe 1000 watts flash units, are actually 2 times, 3 times much more bigger than this. And this is going to be like a trade-off. The higher the wattage output, the unit itself is going to be more heavier and you don't want to lug it around, while the lower power flash units are going to be considerably smaller yet light. And there are like flash units such as the Godox AD100, which is the smallest and the most portable light that you can get. But from my experience, 100 watts isn't more, I mean, it's best if you can get more than that. And the best bet is around this 300 watt area, because once you start like shooting with this 300 watt unit, you want to start to like use various types of accessories such as softboxes, reflectors, grids, and stuff like that. And if you have a lower power flash, you can't sort of compensate for that, for the light being lost when you put some kind of like modifier in front of this. And the beauty of these types of studio flashes is that you get a lot of varieties, a lot of like, you can change the sort of like the mounts and stuff like that. You can sort of like add various types of soft boxes, octoboxes, and you can basically craft your light to your likings. So that's the greatest benefits of using studio flashes actually, which you cannot do with speedlights, because speedlights typically have lower power and they can't. And when you once put some kind of softbox through that speedlight, you lose a lot, considerably lots of light, and you have to shoot at like higher, not higher, you have to like open up the aperture, and you basically have to like compensate by increasing the ISOs and stuff like that on digital, and you get less flexibility with speedlights. But for like these types of like studio lights, you get more possibilities. And yeah, when I purchased this, it came with a sync cable actually. So typically studio flash uses this sort of like super thick I was about to say a headphone jack, but this isn't a headphone jack. I think it's similar to if you're like a bass guitarist or something. It's like similar to that. There's this sort of like thick, like what you call, I can't think of the word, but a plug actually, which you plug into the sort of like the unit itself like this. And on the other side of the cable, there is a small sort of like PC sync type of indentation, which you basically, on the GW690, there's actually this area where you can slide this unit in. I will stick in a BTS video actually, because it's actually hard to see. Like so. And turn on the unit. The unit's turned on, and when you actually fire the unit, it actually fires. So, and I know, and I'm just testing this to see if it works. So basically, you can when you fire it, the unit itself fires. Let me redo that. yeah, it works. It works flawlessly. So this is actually one way of firing the studio flash directly to the camera, but I actually don't like this method. But like, I think a long time ago, this was basically the golden standard in flash studio flash photography, because that's the only option available. But the cons of this method of running this cable directly to the strobe unit itself, you have to keep in mind that if you're shooting a model or if you're shooting for a client or something, someone will trip over this because it's physically running a cable directly to the unit. And 100% of the time, I've seen people like trip over because we're shooting in a dark studio, the cable's dark, it's pitch black, and I hear people screaming. I never use this as of 2023 because it's just hectic when that happens. And it's similar to like USB-C cables when you're charging your phone and stuff like that. If someone trips over, this area is gonna get sheared, and you have to replace it, so you have to purchase this. And these are rather expensive actually in some cases, so I actually never use this method. I have to mention that these analog types of like flash units doesn't have a wireless sort of like capabilities built inside the system, and that's actually another reason why it's like really small and tiny. But if you want to do that, there is a method, which is, I think as of 2023, the cheapest one is, there's a brand called Godox, which I don't know if you can see it, but it is a wireless trigger that has a sort of like a flash sync cable at the side, so you can basically run a cable to the side, and this is basically the exact same what I call sort of like plug. You plug this unit in here like so, turn it on, and you can basically change the channels and get the exact same channel. So channel 4, we'll use channel 4 then. And the other one, the receiver or the transceiver or the receiver, actually there's a button here so you can, I forgot to turn it on. Turn the flash on, and when you press the light, it will fire from the distance. And this is basically, I guess, as of 2023, the easiest way of firing a flash from remote. And I think these units go for more than 10 meters or so, so they're like reliable. And this one is called the Godox FC16. I purchased this used actually for $20. And I guess like 10 years ago, there was a brand called Pocket Wizard, which a lot of photographers still use, but those cost like $100 or so. But like I said, this is basically a wireless trigger, and you can basically put this on top of the flash of the GW690, and hopefully praying, this is my first time using it. Trying to see if it fires. Oh yeah. That feels good. So basically you can fire from the distance. Yeah. Without having anyone to trip over any cables. And that's actually how I would shoot in a studio environment with a film camera. And I'm not sure about this brand, but they have like 3 varieties if I'm right. There's a Nikon version, a Canon version, and a non type of version. There's like a FC16N, which is for Nikon, FC16C for Canon. This one doesn't have that letter in there, so you can basically probably use this in Pentax cameras, Fujifilm cameras, and maybe Sony cameras, so choose accordingly. And yeah, that's how I fire with the studio flash actually. Basically sort of like my overview 101 lecture on studio flashes. Obviously I'm not a good teacher at like explaining things to you guys, but hopefully you guys can get the gist of what a studio flash is, what it can do, what it can't do. And yeah, it's interesting because this company is still like living, and they've been making the exact same lights for more than 30-40 years or so. And it's like amazing to see companies like this still make it brand new with high quality and services still available in Tokyo. So it's actually a brand that I actually trust. Because if something happens, I can basically drop it off at their sort of like maintenance center and get it fixed. So it's sort of like a marvel to see as of in 2023 when everything's shifting towards digital, but you can still use this with film cameras. And typically most like studio flashes you can use with film cameras as long as you have a hot shoe, and these types of wireless triggers come in handy. So they're not super expensive, but you can basically make it sort of like semi-wireless to fire it. So okay, so that's basically my coverage on the Mono 300N by Propet. Hopefully I covered like 80% of the stuff that I should have mentioned. And yeah. Did I forget something? And I think I saw like William Verbeck's like video saying that in the end that he said that there are people who are willing to like give out like used equipments at insane prices. He talked about enlargers in particular. And like I said, this unit's actually been in production for like 10 or maybe 20 years or so. And there's actually a lot, like when I purchased this new, I was like really happy because it's not that expensive. But when I was looking at Craigslist type of site in Japan, we use Midokari and stuff like that, Midokari, PayPay, Frima actually. There was actually a guy who was selling the exact same unit for less than half the cost, and he was selling 2 units, and I was like, oh my goodness, kinda. So if you know where to look, there are people out there who are willing to like give you that specific equipments, especially analog equipments, at insane ridiculous prices. And if you know where to look, you can get a bargain, and you can use that money that you saved on your future projects to come. And yeah, that's basically it. That's hopefully you guys like enjoyed this video, found it informative, educational. Like if you have any questions regarding Studio Flash, I'm happy to reply. I am a professional in that area. That's where I came from. So yeah, we will see you next time. Peace out.